Kia ora everyone, my name is Ingrid Mason. I'm beaming into you today from Ngunnawal country, that's Canberra, Australia. It's a real shame we can't meet in person, but hopefully some of the stimulation from this talk will carry over for another year and we can pick up the conversation in 2023. So I'm here talking today with Alexis Tindall and Shep, and we're going to talk about being computationally ready, what it takes in the cultural sector to actually pick up artificial intelligence technologies and look at how to build that into some of the processes that we've already established. And we have this incredible digitisation legacy that we can revisit. And also maybe to reframe or rethink the way that we work with the research community, whether they're computer scientists or humanists, and the way that we begin to unlock our collections using these technologies. So this talk is going to come to you in three parts. I'm just introducing at this point Alexis Tindall and Shep. So Alexis is going to talk to you about that digitisation legacy and some of the new collection access needs we have, because we know we need to work at getting those collections made more accessible, and that these artificial intelligence technologies have the potential to help us in that process. So she's going to touch on some of the activities that are happening in our part of the world. And then Shep is going to talk about the challenges and opportunities that are coming up in the use of these technologies, but also that revisiting the work with our collection and also the reframing that we have in partnership with both community and also with the research sector. Then I'm going to wrap up in a bit of a discussion about the AOFLAM community. That's artificial intelligence for and by libraries, archives and museums. And in our part of the world, that's called GLAMOUR, the Galleries, Libraries, Archives, Museums and Records community. So hope you enjoy the ride and chat with us while we're talking.
Hi, I'm Alexis Tindall, Manager of Digital Innovation at the University of Adelaide Library and co-convener of the Australian and New Zealand AOFLAM chapter. I'm sorry I can't be with you at NDF, but I'd like to acknowledge that I live, work and record this presentation on the beautiful lands of the Kaurna people. I'm going to start today by talking about digitisation and GLAM collections. That's a pretty new and rarely discussed topic for NDF, isn't it? I'm joking. Digitisation. As a sector, we've kind of got a handle on that, haven't we? Our GLAM community has been digitising content for decades. We're good at it, right? Scanning, photographing, organising files and metadata, 3D scanning, licensing, making material discoverable online. But recent developments in technology have led us to look at our established processes afresh. As artificial intelligence technologies, including machine learning and computer vision, become more usable and accessible to wider audiences, interest grows around applying them to GLAM collections from both inside our own institutions and our stakeholder communities. AI, machine learning and other computational approaches to research and reuse lead to growing demand for access to full text or structured machine-readable data. The challenge of making our collections digitally accessible in a form that meets that need is one driver of participation in the emerging AOFLAM chapter. In many cases, and I am aware that this is a big generalisation, but in my observation, in many cases, digitisation has been driven by an interest in discoverability and access to our collections. These computational approaches make us think differently about use. How ready are our digitised collections for this demand? The significant and complex hurdles to making collections computationally accessible include things like turning scanned, handwritten documents into full text or structured data, making structured data accessible in computationally useful formats, licensing digitised materials in a way that makes them reusable, and making that licensed information machine readable. These new forms of use and user broaden our awareness of the ways that our data curation challenges affect the usability of our collections. The local AOFLAM chapter has delivered a series of community webinars over 2020 and 2021 with the goal of advancing community awareness and discussion of how new technologies affect our role as information custodians. The series included a number of real-world case studies. They include applications where in-house digitisation or other teams have tested or implemented the use of commercial web-based AI services to enhance their metadata, where they've collaborated with technical specialists to turn scanned material into structured records, and where they've invited creative or research partners in to see what can be done with computationally available collections. Participants, leaders and collaborators in these projects have come from a range of backgrounds, bringing a range of skills to the table. The projects that we featured have fallen broadly into two categories. There are those that are applying machine learning and AI technologies to the challenges in GLAM, digitisation, data curation, collection management and sharing, and those that use machine learning or AI and other technologies to conduct research or enable new forms of use of GLAM-sourced data. On the digitisation, data curation and collection management front, we've seen things like the State Library of New South Wales, who applied image recognition technologies, informed by a very well thought through oversight process, to automatically generate image tags, improving item level discoverability. We also saw the Auckland War Memorial Museum, who tested the bounds of image recognition technology, especially when it came to photographic collections of people, and particularly people of diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds. We also saw an experimental project at the National Archives of Australia, who used machine learning in archival appraisal, that is, identifying the preservation or disposal approach for incoming collections, and developed a model that mixed automated decision-making and automated decision support to improve collection management and make it more efficient. On the user side of the equation, we've seen the Australian National University collaborating with Tim Sherratt, historian and hacker, to use machine learning in the Data Curation Challenge, turning the handwritten records of the Sydney Stock Exchange into structured data, with the end goal of that project making them available for reuse in machine learning and AI contexts. We also featured State Library of Queensland hosted digital collections catalyst Keir Winesmith, who talked about his project that used machine learning and historic maps to generate new maps, in doing so generating new perspectives on the landscape that we occupy. And shortly you'll hear from our colleague Sydney Shep, whom we featured her project with Rhys Owen on the beauty and importance of reconfiguring the perspective of the palimpsest-like collection of William Colenso. Later in this presentation, Ingrid will share information on how you can catch up on that webinar program.
Nau mai, heri mai, piki mai. Ko Sydney Shep taku inua, he kai whakahere o Wai-te-ata Press o Te Herenawaka, Victoria University of Wellington. Kia ora tātou. I think we'd all agree that the corpus of cultural heritage data is large, and with digitisation initiatives in full swing around the globe, the result is increasingly not big data, but vast data. I think we'd also agree that cultural heritage data is rich, complex, multifaceted, and in many instances, an artifact of dubious collection practices. Finally, while well-curated, responsible, and accessible data is the sine qua non of the glamour sector, from a researcher's point of view, to paraphrase Tim Sherratt, just give us the goddamn data. Today I thought I would outline a few of the challenges and opportunities that have arisen in my 3 decades of research, and a few of the lessons I've learned along the way. What follows are 3 stories, organized around the themes of sustainability, creativity, and indigeneity. So to start off, a couple of weeks ago, Paul Miller, Professor of Digital Humanities at the University of Canterbury, commented on the conference themes that brought us together for eResearch NZ 2022. Building capability together was all very well, he remarked, but the missing link was sustainability. We've heard from Alexis about the amazing projects happening in the glamour space, but many are experimental, pilot projects. Are they considered long-term investments that should continue to be supported and resourced? Do they lead to change in institutional practices? Do they become embedded in business as usual? Whether we like it or not, I think we know the answer. Like a Wikipedia stub or a 404 not found, these projects often have their moment of brilliance, then fade away into the dark archive. Not that dark archive, but the one of deep preservation that is populated with projects that circle around cyberspace like defunct satellites in space. I can claim several of these. The Wellington Print History Project, 1840 to 2000, was migrated and reinvented, sort of. Others exist in prototype limbo, or like the Literary Atlas of Wellington, are waiting for additional funding at the same time as technology moves on and methodological approaches become redundant. It takes a village to ensure sustainability. Sadly, researchers often work in isolation, dancing to the funding horizons or PBRF metrics, and don't consider the long-term viability of projects until the end. It's too late. Rarely do they engage with glamour professionals from the start, embedding them in projects as co-designers rather than mere service providers or resource provisioners. My advice is to think about sustainability from the outset and build it into every component of your workflows. Snuggle up to researchers, and in fact consider yourself one of them. You have the frameworks and skills to really make a difference. Creativity. How many of you know a creative coder? What digital media artists do you follow? How often do you provide resources that shape new ways of thinking and doing? Is your institution bound by copyright provisions that discourage, if not preempt, creative engagement with, if not the repurposing of, cultural heritage resources? Several years ago, my colleague and fellow researcher, Rhys Owen, and I developed a new approach to William Colenso and the Victorian Republic of Letters. Like a curiosity cabinet that juxtaposes objects to stimulate different kinds of associational thinking, we created a web portal entitled Unexpected Connections that used algorithmic randomization over a selection of digital objects in order to generate new narratives. Serendipity was at the core of the interactive experience, and the creation of visual palimpsests, as you see here, were the provocation to reimagine the research process and what was possible with cultural heritage collections. At the end, Rhys was surprised to find out he was now a creative coder, a liberating experience for a software engineer deeply committed to making archives accessible, and one which I highly recommend. Indigeneity. Last year, I applied to the Catalyst Seed Fund to bring together an overseas data viz artist, an extended reality museum practitioner, and a data curation specialist in order to explore the world of Atamai Iahiko, cultural AI, in collaboration with Māori data sovereignty experts, Aotearoa New Zealand cultural heritage institutions, and local Indigenous communities. The application didn't get past first base, but the recognition that there was a need to shape this space remained. Consequently, when my institution proposed for the third time a data science AI institute, I jumped in with both feet, proposing an embedded or aligned Institute for Data Humanism, framed by several key questions. How can we reimagine AI processes from the ground up that are place-based and participatory? Honor Te Tiriti, Te Ao Māori, and Mātauranga Māori. Recognize diversity, equity, and inclusiveness, and embed responsible data stewardship. How could an AI-enabled future reframe our understanding of societies and cultures and enrich the possibilities of living well in a data-intensive world? To my horror, cultural AI was not part of the vocabulary of my engineering computer science colleagues. To be more precise, cultural AI was considered simply discussions around the social, cultural, public policy, and ethical implications of AI. The fact that the glamour sector has the largest corpus of digitized data that needs unlocking, that we actually do foundational computing, and that students have very little experience with textual, historical, visual, audio, or multimedia data, both needed to be stated and explained. Add to that the complex layering of culturally specific ways of knowing and doing, and I think we can all agree that there is significant mahi ahead of us if we want to build capability and forge new pathways for community-driven and real-world impactful research. Over to you.
Okay, I'm just going to bump off the end of Alexis and Sydney's parts of this presentation. Alexis has mentioned that we've got some webinars we've recorded, and I'm going to touch on where you can access those. And Sydney mentioned this extended reality researcher. Well, I thought I'd do a bit of an expose and say that's Sarah Kenderdine, and she's one of ours. She's there over in Switzerland at EPFL, and she's tackling a research project around transforming access to audiovisual archives through the use of artificial intelligence technologies called Narratives from the Long Tail. And this is a piece that she's written with myself and Lily Hibbert. And if you'd like access to the manuscript, please just sing out. I'm happy to send that to you. But essentially, there's an enormous amount of work going on, and it's a good opportunity to start diving into some of the project work that's happening both in the cultural sector and also in the research sector. So AOFLAM, what is that? And why should we be interested in it? Well, this is a community that came together through 5 institutions that I guess decided to get the ball rolling. And they come from Norway, from the US, from the UK, from France. And they've had 3 international conferences called Fantastic Futures. And the most recent one was held in Paris, which is a big shame that most of us couldn't make it. But there's some amazing work being done in the wider global community. And so we have an enormous brains trust to tap into and also contribute into. But at this end of the world, we're often in a bit of a different time zone. So in the middle of 2020, we set up a regional chapter for Australia and New Zealand to give people the opportunity to share information and to set up initiatives to jump in and jump out as they felt, as a bunch of coordinators, so that we could start building up our knowledge and thinking about how to use artificial intelligence technologies with our cultural collections and also as part of research. So we have been going since about May last year, and we actually have a charter, and this is just a bit of a snippet from that charter. I guess it offers a bit of a flavour of, well, we have really good community relations between Australia and New Zealand when it comes to cultural heritage. We've had a long practice of attending each other's conferences like this, and we love getting together and talking about cultural heritage and more recently digital humanities. And so if you're interested in finding out a bit more about the charter, please get in touch. But it says a little bit about the way that we operate as a community and also about the cultural heritage collections that we work with. So what are we learning? We've been learning a lot. We've had a number of webinars and we've tried to record them so that it's possible for people to play catch up, both on this side of the world but also on the other side of the world, because as I mentioned, there's a big brains trust out there and there's a real demand for people to share information, to leverage off each other, so we can kind of shortcut and not have to wait for the news bulletin to come out, but to be abreast of what's actually happening elsewhere. So there's lots of interesting project work that's showcased in those webinars. And really there's been discussion about how to apply these new technologies and also to our collections, but also how we might undertake research so that we don't just mindlessly or blindly apply these technologies, because ethics is a pretty central part of data curation. So I really encourage you to go and have a look at that playlist at the University of Adelaide Library, and that's thanks to Alexis Tindall for looking after that. But I guess this is also a call to you. This is a call out. We've had all kinds of people jump in and be coordinators, and some of the faces have stayed and we've got new faces. But really this is an opportunity for us as professionals to really extend what we understand and give us an opportunity to think about our collections, because we know technology is increasingly a part of how we manage our collections, and it's growing in significance and the way that we work with our collections and make them accessible. So we need all sorts of perspectives and experiences and projects really and processes to be developed, which I think is pretty exciting. And I hope, or we hope, that you can imagine yourself here and that you might one day suggest we do something and take the lead on that, or just jump in and become a coordinator. So this is the call out to you, those that are listening today at the National Digital Forum. If you would like to, please catch up and join in. We've got a speaker series in planning. There's potentially a global challenge around big data, maybe with newspapers, not quite sure at this point. There are some fantastic working groups in the Slack channel. I haven't had the chance to catch up with the reading group. There are people who have set up their own reading group. There is a teaching and learning working group. There are amazing resources available in that Slack space. And we've got our own little handle there in case people want to share information that's really particular to us. And just a reminder about that YouTube playlist. There's also a mailing list for those people who have the chance to catch up by email. So that's it from me, and a big thank you to Alexis and Sydney for putting their hands up to doing this so that we can share a little of what we've been doing as part of that regional chapter. And we're really looking forward to maybe seeing some new faces or getting some of your questions or having suggestions for talks coming into us. But for now, ka kite anō. Bye now.
The resistance comes from that idea that if you just, throw everything out there and open, there's a decontextualization, that there's a failure to recognize the actual, meaning of the object or the text that you're working with. And that's something that I think has made many people hesitant in this area. And it's something that actually drives my enthusiasm for involvement in this network, is that I think if we can upskill our colleagues and our peers in a way that they can work productively in collaboration with people who are using artificial intelligence type technologies, that they actually have something to offer that community. But in a way, the highly technical nature of that community has frightened many people off from engaging with them. And so I think if we can feel comfortable to participate in those conversations with those people who are, natural language processing types or computer vision types who want access to our collections, but perhaps don't have the cultural context to understand why you can't just take a bunch of people's faces and do something with them, then we can work more. We can help them be better, and we can benefit from their help as well. So I think it's that my interest is bringing those communities together.
And that's something about a data standard around context, isn't it?
A data standard around context.
You need to for the machine coming in without enough context, then it will infer a whole bunch of stuff that probably isn't right. So in the raw data, you need something that helps it understand the context of the various records. This is very complicated. I don't know how you do your work. It's amazing.
Well, I think I also think there are some kind of inbuilt concepts into the way that AI technologies have been developed. So they're there to optimize, they're there for precision, and those are good qualities of technology, but those are not the only qualities of technology. And also to look at the broad patterns, not for the outliers. And interpretation is a very rubbery word, and in the computer science area, what the interpretation is about measurement.
Yes.
And in the curatorial world, it is not about measurement. Measurement comes into it, but actually it's a very different
problem there.
Yes, there's an aesthetic judgment, there's a historical judgment, there's a cultural judgment, there's all sorts of interpretations that are the polar opposite of that. But that's why I dropped that paper in that about Sarah Kenderdine's work, because she is representing just what you described, Alexis, that marriage of computer scientists. They've got a film expert. This person's an expert, particularly, I think, in the colour of film, and someone who's got museum, engagement and experience, expertise, and with new kind of technology. So they are a real, and they've got an information scientist right at the centre of that project who's trying to work out, to your point about data standards, what they can take from these different technologies, because they are looking at some commercial technologies, but also what they need to kind of fine tune themselves. So I do think that's kind of interesting to think about standards in those two perspectives that you talk about, Alexis. But I really hear you saying that that's perceived as a threat. But I have absolute faith that cultural institutions know exactly what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to look after the interests of the community that they have that collection for. That's the heart and soul of collecting. But it is kind of, it's heavy duty stuff. It
I was
there's
just going to say serendipity, I think, is something that we sort of lose in the first parts of digitizing things. You really lose serendipity because you break all those connections in a way. And I love hearing you talk about that, Alexis. And I know some of the work Sarah and I did with the collections was about keeping the links between all the records. The big data viz thing we did.
Yeah.
That was about trying to preserve the connections between things so you didn't lose that.
Yeah.
But I also think that Sydney's work that she profiles with, particularly the William Colenso archives, gives us a whole different way of thinking about that serendipity conversation as well.
Yeah.
Because the links that you're talking about, we always need to remember the links that you're talking about are coming from a colonial curatorial perspective that are linking things in a certain way. Sorry, I'm not being
No, you're absolutely right.
And if you can take, the way that William Colenso's archive would be organised by an archive or its usual holders.
Yeah.
Well, what Sydney and Reese have been able to do is take a computer's perspective, an algorithm's perspective, and say, what happens if we combine these things in a different way? What kind of serendipity can we create?
I just wrote down algorithm a minute ago.
If we remove some
because I was
of
thinking
those
of Facebook and what they do, and the things we can learn from the way that they're manipulating all that.
Manufactured serendipity.
Yeah.
Yes, that's really interesting because recommender systems are very big, the idea that you can kind of look at the patterns of people's behavior and make recommendations. And that they can be really valuable if you haven't had time to work out. And most of us know that you, particularly for access requests, you've had 50 of very similar access requests. The recommender system's going to say, here's a way to kind of do that more efficiently because they fall into the same basket.
Yeah.
So there are upsides to that, definitely.